July 1944, Auschwitz-Birkenau. A young twin crawls over to Knill one night, in the hut. They had earlier seen the twins' parents enter the gas chamber, while both the twins were being used in experiments. Once they have finished, they will send us to the gas chamber, she told Ibby.
Remember what you have seen and tell the world, because we will not be able to.
It took 60 years before Ibby could finally talk about what happened in Auschwitz. She had kept secret the fact that she had survived Nazi concentration camps, even from her own children. And now she is able to use her voice to share her experiences from some of the most dreadful times of her life. This is her story. She calls herself the woman without a number. Ibby Knill, now aged 93, was one of the many 1.3 million Jews sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp in Poland, and now among the few hundred survivors hence the camp's liberation in 1945. I still don't know why I survived, but perhaps it was to talk to you about what the Holocaust truly was. Ibby Knill was born in the year of 1923 in Bratislava, Czechoslovakia. She lived amongst her well-respected Jewish family, a mother, father, and brother. Her family lived in an affluent pocket of the city, so Ibby grew up in good conditions, and she was fluent in 4 languages. Sadly, 1933 marked the year of Adolf Hitler's accession to power. His claims of racial superiority and the desire to genetically improve the population would be used to justify the systematic persecution of those who did not fit the Nazi model. By the time Ibby was 16, Czechoslovakia had become a Nazi puppet state, and Jewish students were not allowed to attend academic institutions beyond that age. Ibby began to notice a shift in attitudes, and she was soon forced to admit that life would be different for her as a young Jewish girl in Europe. In the few years to come, the Knill's family business became Aryanized, meaning forcefully taken over by non-Jews, and they were kicked out of their apartment home. All Jewish people had to wear a yellow star on their clothes and were not allowed to even sit down anywhere in public. I found the situation unacceptable. I covered my yellow star with a scarf.
In the February of 1942, all Jewish girls in Slovakia were rounded out to be prostitutes for German soldiers. Sadly, none of them survived. Ibby's mother has been warned of this and decided that she had to escape urgently. I hid at my grandparents' house in a small village, then was taken to another village. Eventually, I escaped across the border into Hungary. Ibby's aunt in Hungary was scared and refused to help her, so she stayed with a cousin. She had to stay quiet and hidden in the daytime. When her cousin was not home, Ibby stayed with a friend of his that was part of the resistance movement. She got involved and began helping the escaped airmen. Later on, she was caught, tortured, and held in prison for 3 months. The worst part that happened to me was they used torture to get information about the resistance movement, but I didn't have it. Ibby was taken to several internment camps for being an illegal immigrant. Later, Ibby was taken to a refugee camp, where she worked in the field. In October, her family also escaped Hungary, but were interned as illegal immigrants. With the Nazi occupation of Hungary in 1944, the restrictions on Jews were intensified. As I wasn't Hungarian but classed as illegal immigrants, I did not have to wear a yellow star this time. Nevertheless, Ibby was still rounded up with Hungarian Jews and was taken to a brickyard. They emptied the hospitals of many Jewish patients, and Ibby helped nurse them.
On the 12th of June 1944, they were told that they were being transported. No one knew about the existence of Auschwitz. They were loaded into cattle wagons, and the journey lasted 5 days.
When we arrived, men in striped pajamas opened the door and told us to leave the sick, the old, and the children. Men and women were separated. I and 4 other women moved through the gates that proclaimed Abret mat fre. We had a ride at Auschwitz.
Following the normal internment camp procedures, Ibby and several others were told to strip, had the hair shaved off all over their bodies, and were pushed into showers. Then came the registration and tattooing of each person's identity number on their left arm, but there were so many people at the time that the ink ran out and Ibby was not tattooed. Ibby distinctively remembers what life was like inside the camp. 250 women went into each hut. There was so little room we had to sleep squashed up like spoons. Every morning, midday, and evening, everyone was counted. This could take 3 or 4 hours. You had to strip and hold your clothes above your head. If you swayed or even stumbled, you were taken away and never seen again, usually to the gas chambers. Worse than hunger was the thirst. It was summer and there was no water at all. I did not see many things because people were taken away, but you knew there were becoming fewer and fewer of us. Ibi left the camp after agreeing to travel as a nurse with the slave labor transportation of 500 women. They marched at night as to avoid being detected. If there were no barns to hide in during the day, they would lay in the fields. That Ibi was even able to survive this was remarkable. Ibi all the while had no knowledge of the whereabouts of her family, or even if they were still alive. Ibi was liberated by Allied forces on Easter Sunday in 1945 and immediately went to working as an interpreter for the British government. She later found out that her mother and brother survived the war, yet her father was gassed on the last occasion that the chambers were used in Auschwitz. Life hence her liberation was still very difficult, and Ibi was often traumatized with her past.
She later on met and married her husband Bert, who was an officer in the British Army, and they eventually settled down in the town of Leeds during the year 1964. For 50 years, I lived the life of an army officer's wife. I made his family and his history mine. It was only after his death and after my children had left home and made their own lives that I felt the need and the duty to recall my own past and to record my own history. It is Ibi's harrowing experiences, along with a few other million Holocaust survivors, that tell the true stories of one of the history's largest mass genocides.
The Holocaust provides one of the most effective subjects for examining basic moral issues. It was not an accident in history. It occurred because individuals, organizations, and governments made choices that allowed the legalization of discrimination, but also allowed prejudice, hatred, and ultimately mass murder to occur. As we gain insight into the many historical, social, religious, political, and economic factors that cumulatively resulted in the history we have today, we gain awareness of the complexity of these subjects and a perspective on how a convergence of factors can contribute to the disintegration of democratic values. Knill, like many, realized that she had an opportunity to make people realize how invidious and destructive the spread of intolerance and of prejudice of an entire ethnic group can be, not only on the recipient but also on the instigator. It is now our duty to uphold the legacies and stories from the people before us. It is vital that in the generations to come we are able to understand and empathize with the figures and events of the past, as this will greatly impact how we see the present.